Hi, everyone, and welcome to Catalysts for Change, the show where we explore the stories, strategies, and turning points of leaders driving meaningful impact in their communities and across the country. I'm Adam Lister, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest is a trailblazer in Tennessee politics. Beth Harwell made history as the first woman speaker of the Tennessee House of Representatives, leading through one of the most transformative and often divided eras in our state's government. Over 3 decades in office, Speaker Harwell helped shape policies on education, welfare, taxation, and public health. From the Tennessee Promise to landmark tax reform, and even wine and grocery stores, she found ways to move big ideas forward by leaning on pragmatism, civility, and a belief that compromise isn't weakness, but a pathway to progress. In this episode, we'll talk about her journey from college professor to Speaker of the House, and how she drove policy through divided government, and what her story teaches us about leadership in complex times. Let's dive in. Speaker Harwell, thank you for being here.
I'm so glad to be with you. Thank you.
It's so good to see you. And I really enjoyed a few minutes off air when the mics were off, kind of recounting all of the fun and tough moments that we've had. I'd love to start at the beginning of your career. You ran for office for the State House in 1988, excuse me.
That's correct.
What inspired you to do that?
Well, to be honest with you, in just a quick little short personal story, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and right out of Philadelphia, and my grandmother became sick one summer. She came and lived with us. She was bedridden. We had a nurse, but there was a time period where the nurse took an hour and a half off for lunch. It was my job to go sit with grandma. And if you remember that year, that was back in the old days when there were only 3 television stations. And what was on television that summer? Watergate. And my grandma and I sat and watched it together. And she tried to be old Sam Erwin, the senator from Carolina. And I, growing up in Pennsylvania with a strong Yankee accent, said, "Grandma, I just love to hear that man talk." It was Senator Howard Baker.
Wow.
I pretended I was him. She pretended she was Senator Sam Erwin. And we would try to ask the questions.
That's great.
And go through the dialogue. And I knew right then I wanted to study government, and I would like to at some point participate in the legislative process, the give and take of it. I came down here and final note on that, that summer at the end of it, I said, Grandma, I'm going to meet those 2 men. And she said, "Well, honey, you just do that. I think you will." Well, I came down here and went to undergraduate at Lipscomb. My dad said, "You can go to any 4-year Church of Christ you want to go, college you want to go to." Well, the closest one was Lipscomb here in Nashville. So I came down south, fell in love with Nashville, went on and did my graduate work at Vanderbilt. While I was in graduate school at Vanderbilt, they have a program called Impact Forum. I attended, and it was Senator Erwin. And I was able to get him to introduce myself to him and tell him that little short story. I'm not making this up. The next week, I get a little note to Beth, he didn't know my last name, in care of the political science department at Vanderbilt. And it was a note to my grandmom.
Wow.
I got involved in Republican Party politics and got to meet Senator Howard Baker and spend some time with him.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
That's a great story. And I mean, you never know.
That's exactly right. You never know.
When those paths are going to cross.
And that's why I always find
really
it.
cool.
I always try to encourage young people, because you never know what your path may be.
My son, when he was much younger, decided that George W. Bush should be on the dime. And I don't know why. I don't know why that coin, but he wrote him a letter, and I'll be darned if a couple of months later we got a nice picture and a signed picture back from him, which still sits in a safe spot in the house.
That's great.
In your early years, after you got elected in 1988, you took office in 89. You were in the minority. I think Democrats held a 59-40 majority in the State House. Speaker Nafee was in his heyday as Speaker. Lois DeBerry, who we've referenced before on this podcast, was in leadership. You came into office and focused on issues like victims' rights, welfare reform, and children's health. I'm curious, you can do math. How did you think about success and impact given your position in that minority?
Right. And, we weren't just minority, we were the super minority. And not only was I lowly freshman, I was a lowly Republican. Not only just a Republican, but I was a Middle Tennessee Republican. So I wasn't even as good as the East Tennessee boys. The East Tennessee Republicans, they held a special position. I was just one of those lowly freshman Republicans from here in Middle Tennessee, one of the few. And so it was a challenge. But I had clearly things I wanted to accomplish. And one of the things I did early on was reach out to a few of my Democrat colleagues. And I would say, I have this great idea. Would you co-sponsor with me? And because, there's something to be said when you're the majority party, you control the agenda. And I knew that if I was going to get some things I wanted done, I would have to work with my Democrat colleagues to do so.
You got to have some friends.
Yeah,
you got to
exactly.
have some friends. What did those early challenges, and I don't want to frame them as battles, but certainly they weren't, walks in the park.
Mm-hmm.
What did they teach you about how real change happens, not just in the legislature and in state government, but across the board? Overall.
Yeah, it really, I think making other people feel important in what you want to accomplish is a major thing to do. I always try to treat my colleagues with respect, and in return, I think I earn their respect. And I think that's critical no matter what a walk of life you choose. People like to feel important, and they like to feel like you respect them. So I try to exemplify that in the legislative process, and I think it served me well. There were always conflicts and battles. It's, some very strong individuals run for state office, and they care deeply about issues, and they care about their district. So there's always going to be conflict. But at the end of the day, I've always been impressed with the quality and the integrity of people I've served with and their willingness to work with others.
Yeah, I get questions a lot. People see lawmakers on TV or elected officials, and there are often questions about, intent
mm-hmm.
or how deeply do they care, regardless of
mm-hmm.
kind of what side of a problem you're approaching. And
mm-hmm.
I've said, with very few exceptions, almost every lawmaker I've worked with, even the ones with whom we've disagreed or had policy differences, are approaching conversations with a spirit of wanting to do better for their communities.
Mm-hmm.
The battle and the debate is really about what is that better look like? How do you get there? And who's got the power and the influence to make it happen?
Mm-hmm.
That's where the conversation really happens. But generally, everyone I've met with, again, a few exceptions, walks into those offices with strong personalities, but a real heart for service in their community.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, don't get me wrong. Politics has always been a rough and tumble world, and it's not for the faint of heart. But you can get some good things done if you're willing to work well with others.
So you were a lowly Middle Tennessee freshman Republican in 1988.
Mm-hmm.
And less than 30 years later, if I'm
mm-hmm.
doing my math right,
mm-hmm.
you are Speaker of the House. My guess is you didn't wake up and look in the mirror in January of 89 and said, I can be Speaker.
I really didn't. It was not even on my radar. It was really not on my radar. But about halfway through, at one point, Senator Fred Thompson called me and said, Beth, I really think you should look at becoming the Tennessee Republican Party chairman. And that was not anything I ever particularly wanted to do, wasn't even on my agenda, because I really was interested in public policy. And so I told him no. I said, I just don't think that's cut out for me. He says, no, I want you to consider it. I think you'd be the right person. I met with him. And I ended up doing it. And that gave me an opportunity to travel the state, to recruit candidates, to help fund those candidates. Because when you're in the minority party, you can't rely on PAC money or outside. You have to raise the money for private individuals, which was good for me to do. And so I met a lot of people doing that. And I think it laid the groundwork for me to be for my members a source of, she'll work for you, she'll help you.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tried to do that. And I think that helped me in that path. At the end of the day, when we went from being the minority to, the super minority to the minority to the super majority, I thought I might be the right person for that job, because I thought now's a time for us to do things and to treat people the way we would have liked to have been treated, not necessarily the way we were treated. And so we have an opportunity as a party to prove that we can govern better and differently. And I took that very seriously, and that's what I pledged to do. And in some ways, I think we were very successful with that.
Yeah, I would imagine that was a regular source of conflict, that there were a number of folks that sat in that minority position, which is, if you've ever served in government, particularly in the House, it is no fun to be in the minority.
No, it's not.
You have no power,
No.
You have no fun, you get nothing done.
Right.
You all of a sudden become in the majority. My sense is that there are lots of pressure points to do things differently, to influence conversations differently, to treat people differently. But you've often said that compromise is not weakness.
Right. It's not a dirty word. Compromise is actually the only way you get things done.
Well, that was going to be my question, is that you say that, many people may not want to hear it, but what does that mean to you as a leader? And how do you communicate that and build support around that theory with the people that are engaged with the organizations that you were leading? In this case, the House Republican Caucus.
Sure. I really thought it was a time. I come out of an academic background, so I taught government and political science at the college level for many years. And so I have a tendency to want to educate. To me, it's a little bit more than just getting in a closed room and cutting a deal. Here's what you can get, here's what I can get. I really tried to educate my members. And I also think that served me well. They got to voice their opinions. And ultimately, in the day, there were plenty of times I would pull people in the room and I said, we can't leave until we work this out. So, let's sit here till we can hash it out, rather than trying to jam it down their throat. Because I've seen when that happens, can you be successful doing it that way? Absolutely. At the end of the day, is there bitterment and resentment? Yes. And I don't think the public really respects that either.
Yeah. Well, and we were talking earlier, and I'll mention this on air, that I had the opportunity to be in a couple of those meetings where we're not leaving until we settle this. But settling it doesn't mean, to your point, you're happy about it.
Right.
And sometimes there's a bitter pill to swallow, but you always kept civility at the center of your leadership. Whether or not that was returned is a matter of debate. But those conversations were direct but civil. How did that kind of form as a core value in your leadership? And what are the ways that you kept that in the center when you had those bitter pills from folks that were on your same side of the sandbox?
Yeah. I never let go of the very principles and values that I held. You can hold tight to your values and who you are and still be willing to work with other people. And I tried to illustrate that to my members. And that's not just Democrats versus Republicans. A lot of times it's Republicans versus Republicans having strong feelings about issues and differing. At the end of the day, I think that was what I tried to accomplish. And hopefully, as you say, hopefully that's how I'll be remembered, that I really did try to work with the other folks that differed with me. The old Howard Baker saying, that person across the table from you just very well might be right. And it's true. And I've seen when you take minority viewpoints and you put them into what's going to happen with the majority, ultimately you get a better piece of legislation. So just because someone doesn't agree with something, they can offer effective criticism of it, and we can make it a better piece of legislation.
Let me ask you, we have in the last 10 years seen almost entire control of the government at a federal level swap a few times. Right. Democrats have been in control of the House and the Senate and the presidency. Republicans have been in control. Democrats have been back in control, and vice versa. In those moments, people raise questions about trust in institutions, trust in leaders, and may not quite understand the decision-making process. You are in control, whether you're Republicans or Democrats. Why can't you get things done? What did you learn about balancing voices, majority and minority, in leadership, in your case, while you were steering the Republican Party and the Republican caucus, that voters and listeners and leaders should know to kind of peel back a little bit of that curiosity? Like, hey, you guys control every aspect, whether you're Democrat or Republican. Why can't you get this one thing done?
I used to say to my members occasionally, just because we can doesn't mean we should. In other words, if we have enough votes, but it's still not the right thing, then we need to be cautious and make sure that we're following the Constitution, that we see the implications of what we're passing here, because there's always two sides to a story. And that's why I thought was so critical and really made it possible for us to do some great things, I think. While I was Speaker, I walked into this thing, the number one thing I want to do as Speaker is do away with the inheritance of death tax. And, we kind of had to do that on our own. My finance chairman was Charles Sargent. The governor didn't particularly want to be involved in that because he comes from a wealthy family. He didn't want it to look like he was trying to do this for himself. And that was right. But we were able to do that. That took a lot of effort, a lot of sitting down and working out what wasn't really glamorous, that maybe didn't get you sound bites, what was the important thing in order to make it work into the budget and still keep our budget balanced and not have that source of revenue. So that's what I'm talking about. It's easy on the issues that don't have a lot of consequences to just get a great soundbite and be on the evening news. But when the issues that are really important and determine what type of state we're going to live in, those are the issues that you have to sit around the table and really hammer out.
I was an analyst at the Fiscal Review Committee for a few years early in my career. And I remember a person telling me at one point that we spend 90% of our time on things that affect 10% of the people. And 10% of our time on things that affect 90% of the people. And I thought it was just a cute line at the time. And then you see some of those sound bites. You're like, yeah, well, that one got a lot of airtime.
Got of attention.
And it's gonna die in a summer study in about a week. So, but it got a lot of time. I'd love to walk through some of the big moments in your legislative career and start really with the welfare reform and Families First, which was, I want to say, around 1996. You'd been in office for a little under a decade. How did you build support for that across party lines? Right.
That was a major piece of legislation. And it was during President Clinton's term as president, and he released the states to make major reform. At the time, Governor Suncoast wanted to do that. I think they wanted maybe to have a face of a female on that piece of legislation because it impacts women so greatly. And they came and asked me to do it. It was a very complicated piece of legislation. As a matter of fact, when I reflect back on it, it was one of the most complicated because there was financial, there was social, there were all these agencies that were involved in it. The federal government was involved in it, local government. So it was really a complicated piece of legislation. At the time, I had a good staff, both in the Finance Committee and Social Services, helping me design it. I committed that if I took it, we would have to look at some things like, okay, let's make sure that we're fair about this. If we want women to work, we need to make sure that there's childcare, and that childcare has to be adequate. We need to look at the whole issue of these folks traditionally are not able to save. They're traditionally not well educated. How are we going to compensate for that? And still come out with a fiscally sound responsible, because we had let far too many people get on our welfare roll, and we did have to scale it back. President Clinton, who was a Democrat, saw it. Governor Suncoast, the Republicans, saw it. There was agreement that we needed to reform the system. And there again, at the time, Bill Purcell was heading, really a leader within the Democratic Party. And he knows a lot about social services. And I went to him and asked him for his help. And he listened, and he made some helpful suggestions on how I think we had a better piece of legislation. And the reforms that we made still exist today.
And you made a reference a moment ago about repealing the inheritance tax, also known as the death tax.
Right.
I believe we had to do that incrementally.
Yes.
For a lot of the reasons that you talked about. That there is a state budget and there's implications that budget funds. But you mentioned that was one of your top priorities. Walk me through why that was such an important piece of legislation, both in real terms, but then also from a value-based perspective. Why was that important to you and to Tennesseans?
Well, I have to say, in the real term in my life, it was important to my legislative district. I mean, I had heard that from folks over and over again. And from a practical standpoint for our government, I really believed that it was a tax that penalized people and made them want to leave our state. I can't tell you how many people in perhaps what would be seen as a wealthy bracket leave this state upon retirement and go to Florida or one other, and they'll come back here and use doctors here, but they live in Florida because they don't want to pay that tax. And I understand that, but what that means is they're taking that revenue, that money, and spending it in another state, and sometimes even starting another little small business in another state. So it really hurt us, I think, in the long run. However, as you said, I sat down with finance experts, and it wasn't as easy as saying, okay, tomorrow we're going to do away with it. We had to phase it out over a period of time to as much as possible, hold the state harmless and compensate for that lost revenue. So it wasn't as complicated as welfare reform, but it certainly took a longer time to get it completely implemented. But we did. And that's a real credit to the state legislature for getting that done.
One of the lessons that sticks out for me in that as well, and at the time I was lobbying for the Nashville chamber and moonlighting for some other urban chambers as well, we had a very similar constituency. But the lesson that sticks with me about that policy win is the ability to build an ecosystem and a coalition around other groups that may not share a value. And rural elected officials with farmers was a huge value add to that debate because they faced very similar issues, and many folks would not consider them as wealthy, but it was important to ensure that those family farms remained family farms and not subdivisions.
Absolutely. And farmers have it rough enough as it is, and we really were penalizing them in the state of Tennessee, which is just the opposite of what we want to do. When you look at our state seal, and agriculture is so prominent, we love our farmers and we want to treat them right. And this was a big deal to them to lose the death and inheritance tax. And so I was pleased with that. And, at the end of the day, people run for office and they say, well, I'm going to run creating jobs. The government doesn't create jobs. If it does, it's creating jobs that we don't particularly want or need. Who creates jobs are those small business owners. And they were the ones that were hurt by these taxes.
I also think it's a good reminder of messaging matters. And every time we said inheritance tax, folks didn't seem to resonate. But if you said death tax,
that's
it
true.
was that one just really charted on the polls.
Absolutely.
Charter schools and the Tennessee Promise. Tennessee Promise, less controversial, but surprisingly, maybe to some, did get a little bit of pushback because it ran in conflict with some other deeply held values. Yeah. What did it take to push those education reforms forward?
It's interesting because I initially, when Governor Haslam talked to me about the Tennessee Promise, I initially was not for it. And I expressed that to him. I said, when you give something to somebody for free, it undervalues it. It really does. And there are people that have worked very hard to earn their degrees and paid their way. You're now looking at them saying, well, you just hang on, we'll give it to you for free. And I had trouble with that. I came to get where he needed me to be, but on first blush, I was not there. And I will say every time the government tends to get involved in education or supplementing education, it actually ends up raising the cost for the children that aren't participating in that particular program. But at the end of the day, we knew we had to help more Tennesseans pursue degrees. The compromise that I really pushed for, and I think we had the support of the House on this, was I said, this cannot just be community colleges. This has got to be our technical schools because that's where the wave of the future is going to be. It was that many years ago. It is today. I hate to say this because I was a liberal arts major, but if you're going to go to college and major in French or political science, you're not going to make the type of money you would if you majored in electricity or plumbing even. So I'm just saying that there are really ways for young people to make a lot of money and be successful in life that involves some additional education, but not necessarily the liberal arts education that we pushed.
Well, and I would also argue that if the underlying argument in choice in public education, charter schools, magnet schools, et cetera, is fundamentally that parents and kids should choose the path that best aligns with their needs. That argument is just as valid when you say we should be able to choose the post-secondary path that best aligns with our passions and our interests and our skills. And if that is welding or architecture, you should have the ability to pursue those paths.
Absolutely. And with the public charter schools, I really, my passion has always been in education, as you know, and I felt strongly that some children were just being left in the crevices. They were not. The traditional school setting just wasn't meeting their needs. And public charter schools are just that. They're public. They don't charge tuition. They don't make a profit, but they can be more homogeneous. They can target their group. They teach to the students. And so in all full disclosure, I serve on a public charter school board here, and I'm so impressed in what they've been able to do.
Speaker Harwell, I'd love to ask you one final question about one of the most interesting policy debates that I found both curious in that it captured the attention of folks that may not be plugged into politics and legislative debates on any given day, but that's wine and grocery stores.
Yes.
And I was fortunate enough, and I think fondly about this piece of legislation, I got to write the fiscal note for that bill, and which meant I also got to testify in committees often. And you may remember Senator Mike Falk, may he rest in peace. He grilled me in ways that I have never been grilled, and imparted in me a lesson of know your stuff. But I would love to ask you to reflect on wine and grocery stores. This was an issue that lingered over multiple
Oh,
sessions.
yes.
Many Tennesseans, I think, would still wonder why it took so long.
Right.
It was popular in public opinion polls. It was talked about 4, 5, 6 sessions. I can't remember exactly how many. Tell us that story.
Okay, I will. Well, as a side footnote before I begin, I want to thank the staff of the General Assembly. It's amazing how hard they work. And keep in mind, that is a part-time legislature. And they don't have large staffs individually. They have one assistant. So they really rely on that staff, and they do a tremendous job. And I think the federal government could learn a little bit from our state legislature. I'll put that side note in. But
I would also argue the Metro Council could learn a little bit from that structure too. But
yes.
That's a different podcast for a different day.
But I will say that on the wine and grocery store, of all the issues I got asked as I traveled the state, campaigning either for myself or other candidates, that was the number one question I was asked. Everywhere I went, when are we going to get wine in grocery stores? And it wasn't that I think Tennesseans drink so much, it's that they wanted the convenience of, if I'm going to go to the grocery store, to get my bottle of wine for the evening meal. Be that as it may, I mean, traditionally it was stopped because, this is a very religious state. And so the argument from a lot of the lobbyists that didn't want it to pass is, well, you can't vote for this because the Baptists don't want it, or the Church of Christ don't want it. The reality is, I didn't find that to be the case. They didn't want it because they kind of had a monopoly, they did have a monopoly on the liquor industry in this state. And you had to get a lot of factions to the table, and they kept thinking they wouldn't have to do it. And they were successful. They just kept kicking the can down the road until I became speaker. And Lieutenant Governor Ramsey came in, and both of us called them in and said, "This is going to get done. This I don't care whether the governor's with us. I don't care. This is going to get done." That put it in a little different light. In other words, they couldn't just keep killing it in committees, because you can really design a committee system to help get something passed or not. So they knew they had to come to the table, and it was one of those times I literally locked them in the speaker's conference room and said, "You will work this out." There were a lot of vested interests. We had set up a system where there was wholesalers, there was the retailers, there were the grocery stores, there were the people that were not grocery stores, but they sold some groceries like Target. All these groups had to get together and figure out what's fair for all of us. And so just one example, traditionally liquor stores not open on Sundays. Okay. Grocery stores are. So do they not get to sell wine on Sundays, or do we let liquor stores open back up again? They sat and hashed this out, it's because the liquor store is saying, well, that's going to cut into our bottom line because we're going to have to pay more people to work on Sundays, and that's going to be higher wage. Whereas the grocery store said, well, that's not fair. We're open anyway. We should be able to have this revenue source. So it was those kind of things that you don't think about, but they're highly contentious. And let's face it, this is where a lot of people make their living. And so, we had to do what was right by the consumer, but we also had to do right by these different employers.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of just the complexity of these issues, because the simple approach would be, well, just let them sell it on Sunday.
Yeah.
But if you're running a business and you've got to turn on the HVAC and pay your staff, et cetera, when the other entity is already open, it's not necessarily a disqualifying argument, but it's a legitimate consideration to take in. What was it that you feel like broke the log jam that kind of held everybody to a place where like we can be okay with swallowing the bitter pill that we talked about earlier, other than just knowing that this was the year? But what was it that you feel like helped move those conversations from a place where they were circling around each other, but got into a path where they could be more productive?
I think what happened is the government relations folks for these major industries realized that it was going to get done, and they could either have a lot of input or a little. And there was too much interest on their part to throw in the towel and say, well, let's see if we can just kill it in committee. Because I made it quite clear, you're not going to kill it in committee this year. If I have to come in and vote myself, we are going to get this out. So you better work it out. And I think that was the difference. They saw the writing on the wall and realized they had to do it.
Yeah. You have worked with both Republicans and Democrats sitting in the governor's mansion. What was different about leading in divided government compared to one-party control?
I think when leading in a divided government, in some ways there's the positive of you have to work together. And at the end of the day, everybody kind of has to sign off. Whether it was Lamar Alexander's Better School program, where I was not in office at the time, but the Democrats had a lot of input into that because he knew he had to take their input in order to get passed. I think it made it a better bill. Or you come forward a little bit when Bredesen was in office. Governor Bredesen, in order to reform TennCare, which although it was painful, he did the right thing. It had to happen. And he would not have been successful had it not been for Republican votes. And he knew it. So he listened to Republicans a little bit more. And although I'm so proud of the Republican Party, and I think the leadership is good and we're leading, you have to be careful when you don't need other people, because that doesn't necessarily make for the best or sound programs. So it's who can get the votes, as Shelby Reinhardt used to say, the old famous saying, you sell the dome off the Capitol if you can get the votes. And that's, you should have to work for your votes. You shouldn't just automatically say, oh, because it's a Republican issue, we get it passed, without listening to the other viewpoint.
I know there were many times when I had a perspective and I would go into a member's office and I was hoping they would vote one way or the other. And it was always enlightening to me to know that I wasn't the only voice that they were hearing. Sometimes frustrating because we just like, hey, let's get through this subcommittee. But it was always a valuable moment to realize that there are multiple levers and multiple community influences at play. And I think your point is a good one, that it got us typically to a longer, sometimes more frustrating process, but really good policy outcomes because the diversity of influences in those discussions were more dynamic and vast.
And I used to tell my members, I know people have a negative idea about lobbyists, and some of them are bad, but a lot of them are very good. I mean, they're representing, and it's your job as a member to listen. Let's say, for example, has to do with whether optometrists can treat pink eye, which require medicine, or ophthalmologists will say, no, of course not. We're medical degrees. They shouldn't be allowed to treat these problems. But I would say to my members, you'd sit there and you listen to both sides and you think to yourself, okay, I represent Nashville, so there's ophthalmologists anywhere you want. You go into some of these rural areas, there are not. So let's try to, view this from a number of different perspectives. And I think one of the best things I did when I was speaker is I made it a point of going to members' districts, even to Democrat members' districts. And when you go into someone's district, you understand that member so much better,
Yeah, there's nothing like going to meet a member in their district. It's a good way to demonstrate, I care about you, I care about your community, but also I'm going to come and hear and see the things that you hear and see on a regular basis. You had a large caucus and it grew over time. How did you handle challenges when members in your own caucus wanted to push you in a direction that you may not have thought was wise or prudent at the time?
I think the biggest challenge was some of my members didn't always agree with some of Governor Haslam's agenda. And I used to occasionally remind the governor, I'm not here to promote your agenda. I'm here to promote the Republican caucus. I mean, I report to my members. But I also think all of his ideas were excellent. And at the end of the day, he was a very willing man to listen to other points of view and to take criticism and positive outcomes. And so I think we really as a whole worked well together. And it was, there were times when it was a little dysfunctional, times we, Ramsey and I would get angry at each other about something. But at the end of the day, I think all of us were headed in the right direction for our state. And I think during those 8 years I was speaker, we had some of the best years this state has ever seen.
We've talked a little bit about compromise and civility. Was there a moment when relationship building changed the outcome of a policy debate?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, when I used to teach political science, it was the chart in the book, or how a bill becomes a law. And it was just drawn out, right, in a little diagram. But, you get in a legislative process and you see that page jumps out of the book and comes alive because you see that it really is the interaction of people working together and the influences they're feeling in their own lives to actually get something done. And so really I found the best thing I did was really getting to know my members.
So most of the listeners to this show are folks that are leading nonprofit organizations or civic-based groups and may not be directly involved in politics, maybe doing some fundraising work, some advocacy work, et cetera. What is something that you think that those community and civic leaders can learn from your experiences about keeping coalitions together?
I think one of the two things really. At first, I tried always to be honest. I was honest with my members. If I'd say, I'm going to have to cut you down on this one, I was honest with them. And I think I tried to protect strength in my position. I mean, I was known to cut members off when I think they were out of line. I was known to do some things like that. But I also tried to illustrate kindness, that I would try to work with them the best I could. And at the end of the day, I remember back when I was working in the real world, in a regular job, one of the first jobs I ever had, and I was so nervous about doing it right and getting it all right. And my boss said, I'm going to take you to lunch today. And he said, I'm going to tell you one thing, that if you'll do this, you're going to be a success in this job. And I remember thinking, gosh, one thing, surely I can do one thing and be successful. And I said, well, yes, sir, what is it? And he said, I want you to treat everyone you meet in this capacity as if they had a sign in their chest that said, make me feel important. And I used to say to my members, put that sign in neon lights when you see a constituent or you see someone coming to you for help or advice. And I think that overall serves anyone well.
My very first job in politics was with Senator Mitch McConnell. Mm-hmm. And I was so far down the rung on the ladder that I was barely adjacent to the ladder. My responsibility was to go out and find places to put large signs in rural Western Kentucky, and then to attend all of the Lincoln Day dinners in those little bitty counties in far Western Kentucky. But Senator McConnell had this habit of grabbing the staffers, probably doesn't even remember my name, and walking up to a table and saying, excuse me, Mrs. So-and-so, this is my friend Adam. He is here today by himself. Would it be okay if he sits at your table? Will you take care of him tonight? And he did it consistently. And to your point about making people feel important, the men and women that sat at these, rural Western Kentucky Lincoln Day dinners got to go home and say, the senator from Kentucky came to my table and asked a person to sit at our table. I was unimportant. I was the sweat equity that put the signs in the ground for a couple of months. Well,
I would disagree. I would say that's very important, but go ahead.
Fair. But he made voters feel important because he showed them that, hey, I'm willing to walk up and talk to you, even for a brief moment. And I want to entrust a part of my campaign, however small, however insignificant to the day compared to the speech he was given. But he gave 6 to 7 people at every one of those events a reason to feel connected to him. Absolutely. And to feel important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
After decades of serving in the House, you stepped into the 2018 governor's race. I'm really curious to know, what did that experience teach you about leadership? So you led a House caucus, you led an entire body, and now you are stepping up, raising your hand to lead in an entirely different way. What did you learn from that?
Well, I think I've learned that the public, when it comes to politics, when it comes to electing officials, they don't care as much about knowledge and experience as they do someone coming from the outside in. And I think I was a little bit of a victim of people just don't like government as a whole, even though I think we did a great job in this state. Lowered taxes, kept them, all these things which should make people very happy. I think that was kind of negated against fresh people. So I think I learned that people want, from time to time, new leadership and fresh ideas.
It is hard to appreciate when success happens that it just doesn't happen by default. And I can understand kind of where you're coming from, because you see the fruits of hard work and thoughtful approaches. Rarely do you see the things that kind of led to those moments. Is there anything about that experience that shaped the way you think about your legacy as speaker that you would reflect on and say, oh, that's a moment that at the time I might not have thought was really important, but had a bigger impact than I expected? when you were looking at it through a different lens?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it never feels good to lose, but I'm always grateful for the opportunity to have done it. And I know this sounds kind of quick, but I really appreciated meeting Tennesseans, and people were kind. And I love the state. I mean, I want to be involved in public policy and continue to serve in some capacities, or whether it's on boards or other ways. But we've got a wonderful state. We've got a lot of good things going for us. We can't take anything for granted. We're enjoying great economic times right now. That might not always be the case. So I hope that we're preparing for any downturns that might happen in the economy, because I've been there when things are going great. I've been there when things are not going great, like income tax debates.
That's a really good point, because I do remember there were a couple of years, especially early on in those moments when Republicans had begun to kind of edge out into the majority. The budget was in a tight spot.
It was a tight spot.
And, there was kind of constant questions about what are the estimates going to be? Are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to be able to do that? And estimates didn't come in on a quarterly basis as we had hoped. What do you do when the legislature leaves in April or May, which also credit to you for helping get the legislature out in April to May and not in June or July. But what do you do in those moments when you've concluded your business in April and you've got a plan, and then all of a sudden September or October rolls around and things are like, not good.
Yeah. Well, to that point, number one, when I said when I came speaker, I said there's one reform I am going to put in place, and we're going to limit the number of bills that are introduced every year. And I really I said, I've traveled all over this state. I've never had any citizen come up to me and say, please put more laws on my life. I want some more regulations on me. I said, we don't need to. We're the party of less government, not more government. Let's scale back what we're doing. And I really think it helped us move faster. It made members prioritize, and it was fairer to the staff, because they do a ton of work on something that wasn't going to get out at committee anyway. And I just think all the way around, I felt like it made us work more efficiently, reduce the number of subcommittees. Again, anytime you can kind of streamline government, that's a wise thing to do. But you're right. There are times when we are adjourned, we've completed our business, and the budget then takes a dive. Well, maybe we increase a lot more money comes in, or vice versa. And that's why serving on that finance committee, I served on finance committee for a while, and then I put really good people in that committee. That committee works hard. And although I say it's a part-time legislature, that committee is meeting almost year round to come in and make any changes that need to be. They had that authority to do.
Yeah, my body kind of shivers a little bit when I think back to walking into budget sub and finance committees. I still, like, as you're talking about that, I'm hearing in the back of my mind, move it out. Yeah. Which is a deep cut for anybody that's connected to the legislature. When you look back over the course of your career, going all the way back to 1988, what were the threads that connected those 3 decades of service for you?
For me, coming out of, teaching government, knowing how I'd love to see public policy formed and how government should work. So I come out at maybe a little idealistic, and then running for office myself and losing that first time taught me a lot about getting up, picking up and trying again, and being more involved with the community so people get to know you better. So I learned. And then my early years of service was really about getting my feet on the ground and knowing enough that I could contribute and be a part of the process. Some members never bothered to do that, and they serve their districts, but other members really want to be on the public policy side of it and want to play a significant role that way. And I tried to do that. To learn the system, to learn parliamentary procedure. And so then, as I saw our party move to more of a dominant statute, I wanted to help us govern appropriately and feel like we were doing it the right way. And so ultimately that led me to run for speaker. And I was honored to do that for 8 years. It was wonderful, highlight of my professional career.
I'm curious, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that you were a trailblazer in a lot of ways. For young leaders, especially women, what is your advice for them to lead with authenticity, particularly in environments that may feel like they're not optimized for them?
Well, I think well, the old saying is, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. Well, there's some truth to that, but that doesn't mean you can't be the person that's studied and tried to learn as much as you can. And people do take note, whether you're male or female, if you have something too significant to contribute. And I think that would be the best thing I could tell young women that are interested in a career in service, because politics really is service. I mean, you shouldn't be able to get rich in politics. This is you really need to earn your money somewhere else and do this as a service to your community, and stay close to your constituency, and always know that you have to be humble. I mean,
your point about not getting rich, I think about all of the candidates that I've advised and worked with over the time, and the best ones are the ones that losing won't define their life. Mm-hmm. Because they run freer and they run looser, and they run in a way that allows them to stay close to their principles and to connect with their community, not because they need to accomplish something in order to get to some other kind of professional level or moment.
Yeah. And I felt that myself, because when I was elected to the legislature, I represented a pro-choice district. It was overwhelmingly pro-choice, but I'm pro-life. And I made that clear to my constituents. I will vote pro-life, but I respect your opinion and I will listen to it. And I think that's, again, the reason why I was able to help my members. So I would feel when they were out of step with their districts, and I would try to help them.
When you think about your perspectives around compromise and civility, how do we fold that into political conversations today, presuming it's still relevant?
Mm-hmm. I do think it is. I mean, as I said earlier, politics is not for the faint of heart. It's a tough business, and it can be, and it always has been that way. I mean, go back and read history, it's always been tough. But I do think that people are basically hungering and thirsting for more civility. They're tiring of it. And, the interesting thing is I know the Republicans are on top now, both at the federal level and at the state level. And I'm so pleased that we are. And I think we'll stay there for a long time. But if you poll most people, they are pretty disgusted, both the Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats are doing worse than the Republicans are. But both of them, people are just like, enough already. We're losing a generation to political involvement because they just think, I don't want to be, So that would be my hope for the next generation, that they would bring a little civility back into the discussion.
I would argue, to your point, and staying close and listening to your district, if people are clamoring for that, every single time I've been involved in a race that defeats an incumbent in a challenge, whether it's in a primary or general, the through line is when the challenger is able to show the incumbent as being out of touch with their district and out of touch with what that district needs, and being able to listen and then reframe what you're doing and how you're supporting that district is critical, whether it's in the tone, whether it's in the policies. And when folks forget that, they find themselves in a place of peril from an electoral perspective.
Absolutely.
And we've seen it, every single year, year over year.
Right.
Who or what over the course of your career has been a catalyst for change in your own life? You talked a little bit about your dad giving you the flexibility to go to any Church of Christ university.
I don't know how flexible that was, but okay.
I love the parameters there. Yeah. We've had lots of experiences about you can do whatever you want as long as it's these things. Who or what has been the catalyst for impact for you?
Well, I think you're right to say that I've was blessed to have a very wonderful family to grow up in. And you don't take that for granted, because not everybody has that. And it does give you a foundation in life. And it really does emphasize how government should do everything it can to keep families free and making their own decisions and providing for their children. So I don't underestimate my family in that. I had some excellent teachers along the way. And of course, I'm prejudiced that way, but teachers have influenced me a lot. But then in the political world, I've had people that, like Senator Lamar Alexander, I've always admired him. I always thought he was one of the smart people in the room. In other words, he got it. He got public policy. He was able to be a great campaigner, great speaker, but he also could sit and hammer things out. And of course, Bill Haslam as well. He had that same temperament. So I've had a lot of good role models in public service. They're there to be found. And
if you could leave our listeners, whether they are aspiring to public service or whether they are leading organizations that are doing good work in their communities with one piece of advice about leadership in complex times, what would it be?
Well, I'd say stay true to yourself and stay focused and know that, there are simple answers to complex problems, but they're usually wrong. So if it's complex and it's a difficult time, then that just means you have to buckle down and put all your capacity on it. But I do think leadership is so critical right now because we're floundering a little bit, and I'm so proud of those people who can lead and take a role. And not everything revolves around government or politics. Leadership is shown in all these walks of life, as you said, and I hope those good leaders will be involved in the political process. If nothing else, register to vote and vote.
We will have a link in the show description on how to register to vote. Tennessee does not score highly in civic participation. And it's hard to have real, authentic debate about important issues if people are staying on the sidelines.
Absolutely.
A big thank you to Speaker Harwell for joining me today. Her story is a reminder that civility and compromise aren't signs of weakness. They're the foundations of leadership that gets big things done. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and a review and share it with someone who you believe would find it valuable. We've got more amazing episodes and guests coming this season, so subscribe to Catalysts for Change wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at catalystsforchangepod.com. Thank you again for listening to Catalysts for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.